Hello and welcome back to the MongoDB Twitch stream. So I am here with Mike Lin today, who is going to be the star of the hour, and we're going to be talking about Swift for server-side development. So this is a topic that I know nothing about, so Mike is definitely the expert here. Any comment on that, Mike?
Well, I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I have been spending a lot of time diving into Swift ever since Caitlin and the drivers team released the new Swift driver for MongoDB. I've been spending a lot of time with it, and also diving into Realm. Not sure if you can see my T-shirt, but
I see it.
yes, yeah.
So
I'm on.
I was going to
I'm
jump in and
on.
just go over a few more logistical things before we get into the bulk of it, Mike. Is that all right?
Yeah, sounds
Sweet.
perfect.
So we are live. We are engaging in the chat. Yo, Adrian says "Sweet Realm T-shirt." So we are live. I can see it. As we're going through this particular stream, I will be helping moderate this chat. So if you have a question for Mike, drop it in the chat, and I will stop him, and we will try to get that covered for you. Outside of that, I mean, if there's any kind of audio or video issues between either me or Mike, drop them in the chat, and we'll work to fix them. I think that's it, Mike.
Awesome, great. Well, I'm super excited to talk to the folks out there about Swift, and I know I see folks piling in, so that's awesome. Welcome to everybody. I want to start this off by saying I'm by no stretch an expert in Swift, but I do know MongoDB pretty well, and that's why I was so excited when I found out that we had joined the server-side Swift working group, and that we're really leaning into this environment. So I'm excited to talk to you guys about the driver and about this environment. So the goals for today, I'm going to run through this this very brief slideshow, and hopefully you'll get a good understanding of what MongoDB Atlas is. I'm guessing a lot of you already have that, but if not, we'll cover that. Swift and Xcode, of course, we're going to go through that. That's the whole idea here. And then the MongoDB Swift driver, we'll show you how to use that, how to integrate that into your Swift programs. And then I'll also introduce you to the Swift package manager. That's how we're going to do that integration. That's how we're going to get a hold of this Swift driver for MongoDB. By the end of the stream, you should be able to use Xcode and begin experimenting with Swift if you haven't done that yet. You should be able to use SPM, the Swift package manager, and begin to create a project, incorporate the MongoDB driver, and create an executable. That's the whole idea today. We're going to create an executable that runs on your Mac and has no external dependencies. You can send that executable to your friends and have them run it on their Mac as well. Some prerequisites for today: you will need a relatively modern Mac if you want to follow along. So you're going to need a Mac computer. Swift will run on a Linux environment, but I'm not going to cover that today. There's going to be some additional requirements around that to run Swift in a Linux environment, but I'm not going to cover that. You'll need Xcode installed on that Mac, and I'm going to cover how to do that. So I'll give you some instructions on how to get Xcode installed. Xcode is the IDE, the integrated development environment for Apple and Swift. You'll need MongoDB, and I'll also be walking you through how to get that done, how to make use of a MongoDB database.
So
in terms
Mike,
of the hardware,
I probably have one of my first of many awful questions here. So just to be clear, are we building a desktop application, or are we building a server-side application?
well, so I don't have a server available to me, so
Sure.
my desktop is going to pretend to be a server, but
All right.
we're going to make use of server-side Swift today.
But I meant like with a UI and all of that nifty stuff.
Yeah.
All right.
No UI today. Yeah, we're
All right.
gonna build a headless app. It'll be a server-side application that we're going to build today.
Perfect.
So here's a list of the hardware that you'll need if you've got a MacBook, MacBook Air, MacBook Pro. These are the years that you're going to need. Some of them are relatively older, like 2012. But if you've got a Pro, an iMac Pro, that'll need to be a 2017 or newer model. I want to warn you, Xcode is a bit of a disk hog. It can take up to 30 gigabytes or more, depending on the number of simulators you want to use. Simulators are, if you're going to be writing iOS applications, you will want to simulate those applications on your desktop, and those take up quite a bit of space. Some of them are 6 to 10 gigabytes each. So just a warning about that. Before you begin to download Xcode, you should probably have 6 to 10 gigabytes free in order to just install the base install of Xcode, which is the development environment.
So we have some
Once you've
questions
got
coming in, Mike.
Xcode, oh yeah, yeah.
Sorry, I'm throwing you on a loop here. We have B Yaru Hoff saying, which version of Xcode do we need?
Yeah. So I'm going to be using 11.5, but I think 11 or better will work for what we want to do today. Okay.
Perfect. And then we also have Yo Adrian is saying that she is counting the puns that are going to happen here. So we're going to have a counter going on.
All right. We need a pun counter built in. Do you have like an OBS plugin to to list the number of puns?
No, maybe we should make one.
I'm going to swiftly move on.
Ah.
All right. Okay, so installing Swift. Once you have Xcode installed, you should be able to run Swift from the command line. You may have to take an extra step, and at the bottom there, Xcode-select-install will help you get Swift installed at the command line. If you want to check the version of your OS, the way to do that is to find the apple in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, click About This Mac. You're going to want Catalina, at least for today. If you happen to get it working on prior versions of macOS, let me know. I'm going to be inviting you to the MongoDB community. I hang out there quite a bit and would love to have a conversation with you about your experiences, and if you have any questions about today that you didn't get to ask on the stream, I'll be in the community. You can get there by going to community.mongodb.com. Hope to see you in there. Once you if you need to install Xcode, you can do it through the Mac App Store. So just Command space and then run the App Store app on your Mac and search for Xcode. Should be the first thing that comes up. Click the Get. It'll take about 20 minutes to half an hour, depending on your internet speed. Like I said, it's I think the download is about 3 gigs, but it expands, of course. So what are we going to do today, Nick?
Like I heard,
Test.
yes, this is the test. We're going to be building a CLI application, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what we're going to do with that CLI application is beyond me. I'm learning just as much as everyone else is on this one. But it's going to use MongoDB, I hope.
Yeah, it'll use MongoDB. We're going to go from a CSV file to a MongoDB database. And this is something that I've had to do quite a bit through my time here at MongoDB with a lot of these side projects and demo apps and programs that I participate in at MongoDB. We have a lot of these CSV files that are generated from other systems that we need to get into MongoDB. And what I'm going to do today is create an executable that I can share with a colleague that they can run, and it'll automatically import a file. Now I'm going to do a very simple version, but it'll be a starting point for you to learn how you can use the Swift MongoDB driver to do this. And you might be thinking, well, geez, Mike, that's dumb, because there's this handy Mongo import utility that you can use. Yes, I know. Mongo import is phenomenal, and you can use Mongo import at the command line to do the very same thing. However, have you ever tried to explain the Mongo import syntax to someone who's never used MongoDB? Have you ever done that, Nick?
No.
Okay.
Not yet, at least.
So it can be a little tricky. There's a lot of parameters, and you need to know the host name, and if the host name changes, you got to communicate that. You got to give them the password. There are just a lot of things that if you're trying to have someone who is not familiar with MongoDB do the import for you, it can be quite tricky. So that's where this idea came, and I said, well, let me just write either a script or an executable that will do this, that we don't have to exchange those all those details, and I want it to be self-contained. I don't want it to have environmental dependencies. So that's what we're going to build today.
Sweet.
Uh, really briefly, if you're coming to us to MongoDB from the relational world, from a relational background, SQL based perhaps, maybe you're familiar with, I don't know, MySQL or Postgres or Oracle, Sybase. I worked in Sybase for a number of years, many years ago. Um, you'll be familiar with document schemas that look like those on the left of your screen. So when you model your data that's going to go into your database, you're going to want to normalize it, and that means creating multiple tables, right? So if I had a customer database, I'm going to want to create a table for the customer name information and maybe the date of birth, and then I want to I reduce the amount of times I duplicate data. I'm going to create a separate table for countries, and I'll refer to that. I'll link to that. That's not really how we do things in a document database, although your application may require that type of layout where you have multiple data structures separately. What typically happens with MongoDB is you leverage the document model to embed rather than link, and that's what you see on the right. The data on the left is represented on the right using an embedded model. And what we find is that for many use cases, this is much more efficient and allows you to access the data much more efficiently. Your mileage may vary based on your application's use case, the read-write profile of your application, but that's, I just wanted to explain that out of the gate, because you're going to see data represented on the right in JSON format. We store data in MongoDB, not in JSON, but in something called BSON, which is a binary representation of JSON. Looks a lot like it when you dump it out.
So Mike, I have a question.
MongoDB. Yes,
So
sir.
on that previous slide, we're referencing a lot of different tables there, which are similar to CSV. So for this application that we're going to build today, are we doing it from a single CSV file, or are we going to be handling any kind of relationships between the worksheets?
Today we're going to keep it super simple. This will be a
All right.
starting point. So we'll keep it super simple. We're going to have one CSV file, and it'll be really, really simple for
Got
today.
it.
Maybe we'll build on this for the next stream.
Hey, that's
Okay.
absolutely fine.
All right, cool, man. So I wanted to talk about the drivers that we have. MongoDB allows you to write code in various languages, leveraging a driver. So obviously we're talking today about Swift, but we've got drivers for pretty much any modern language and framework that you want to use. So if you're a Perl programmer or a Node.js or C++ or C#, we have drivers, and you could do pretty much the same thing I'm going to do today, using an idiomatic approach. And by that I mean, if I'm writing code that's going to modify my data in MongoDB in PHP, I'm going to write PHP code. So it'll be idiomatic to the language environment that I'm using. So what are we going to do today? Well, here's a brief outline of the steps, and I hope we get to all of these things. We had planned, I guess, to keep it under 60 minutes. Is that right?
I mean,
Oops.
I don't mind going over. I don't think I have anything planned after this, but it's totally up to you.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see where it takes us.
Yep.
So we're going to launch an Atlas cluster. MongoDB Atlas is our database as a service. I'm going to explain that in a moment. We're going to initialize a Swift package. Swift Package Manager is awesome. It's been really great to get into that. I'll show you how to use SPM. We'll build a very simple hello world. We'll add some dependencies to that. We'll build it and test it, and then we'll configure the MongoDB Atlas connection, and then we'll get into the CSV file reading and creating documents in a MongoDB database. So hopefully we'll come back and we'll check through this entire list, get that done. A little bit of information about MongoDB Atlas. MongoDB Atlas is an amazing application. It's taken many years for the team here at MongoDB to build MongoDB Atlas as a service, and it rides above the cloud provider layer. So MongoDB sits above those three cloud providers that you see there. And what that means is that you can deploy your MongoDB instances super easily into one or more of those cloud providers, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, or AWS. And I'm going to show you how to do that. It's important to note that when you do that, when you use MongoDB Atlas, you're not just getting a single instance of MongoDB, you're getting a highly available cluster of MongoDB. And that's even true with the free instance. So I'm going to show you how to launch and deploy a MongoDB instance in Atlas for free without even pulling a credit card out. And that's
Cool.
free forever, by the way. So it is highly available. You get 3 nodes. If one of those nodes goes down, then the other 2 pick it up until the third is brought back online. So that is called high availability, and it's built right into MongoDB Atlas. So let's go over a little bit about Swift. Swift in a nutshell. I love it. It's a compiled language, which means you can create something that is super fast and super efficient. It's not interpreted like JavaScript. Well, I'll put it this way: JavaScript can be compiled today. There are frameworks that will compile it to make it more efficient and to bundle in all of your external dependencies. But well, yeah. So Babel, I guess some people call it. Right?
Does that create a machine load?
ES6.
But does that create a machine compiled exe file or similar?
No, it's still interpreted, I guess. Yeah. So
Right.
I guess technically it's still interpreted. Good point. But this is truly converted into machine language. So
just for Mac though, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. And it supports strong types. So it is a strongly typed language. It's really super clean and super efficient. Not a slam on JavaScript, but there's no unnecessary semicolons. It supports Unicode, which is pretty cool. You can have Unicode in your variable names if you want to use emoji to name your variables. That's cool.
Oh man, I can't.
And
I'd hate to be the person on that team who deals with the the emoji variable creator.
Oh, you would do it if you could in Go, wouldn't you?
Well, first of all, I don't even know how to create an emoji on my keyboard, if that's even how you do it. So that shows you how awful I am.
You go to Emojipedia.
Yeah.
Copy it. That's what I do. Yeah. So apart from those things, it supports all of the structures and things in a language that you would expect. It's got arrays, it's got dictionaries, it's got sets and enumerators, conditionals, cases, iterators, all of the things that a modern language supports. And it's presented in a clean and human readable form. So it's very, very readable, easy to interact with. It is also an object-oriented language. It supports classes, structures, prototypes, inheritance, and I'll take you through a little bit of just some of the structures that we'll see today. So arrays, I mean, if you're a developer today, you're most likely familiar with arrays. Here's the implementation of arrays in Swift. Pretty straightforward, right? You see you can have an array of numbers. One thing to note is that in Swift, your arrays will all be of the same type. Array elements must be all of the same type. So you interact with arrays in the same way that you would in JavaScript. You can iterate over them. And that is a print statement that you see there. That's a Swift print statement.
We're getting a question coming in. Question from Ricky Yu is saying, based on Objective-C. So I'm not sure how to interpret that question, but maybe you do.
Yeah, I don't know technically. Yeah, I don't know that. So Swift is the not the predecessor. Objective-C is the predecessor to Swift, but I don't know that Swift is built on or based on Objective-C. I'm not sure if that's technically accurate because I think Swift is written in C++. I don't know. To be honest with you, I'm gonna say I don't know before I get myself into trouble. So maybe maybe somebody else on the call knows. So these are arrays, and you interact with them in the very same way that you would in other languages. Note that they are ordered. So when I iterate over an array structure, the elements are ordered. Unlike sets, so sets are very much like arrays in Swift, but they're kind of unique in that they are unordered. So if I were to iterate over a set in Swift and print out the names, I might get an unordered list. So that's good to keep in mind. There are also methods on this set that you can do things like contains, for example. I can check if Nick is a part of the set, for example.
Yeah. We're getting another question here. And this I'd be curious about this too. Do you need to know Objective C before Swift, or could you learn it completely independent?
I'm going to say that you can learn it independently. Now, I worked in Objective-C many years ago, but I had a good bit of time off, and I spent I don't know, maybe 6 years working in Python and JavaScript before coming to Swift. And I approached Swift as a brand new language. I don't think I really used my Objective-C knowledge. So I would say you could dive right in. The other thing that is really helpful with Swift is the tools that you have available to learn it without learning Objective-C first. So you can download what are called playgrounds, which are basically books that you can use to help you learn right in Xcode. And I think thinking about this, I probably should have incorporated that into the presentation today. But definitely go Google Xcode Swift playgrounds, and that's a great way to get started without having to learn Objective-C first. So that's arrays, that's sets. We also have dictionaries. So dictionaries are key value pairs. They're very simple. There's no embedding. I don't believe there's embedding in dictionaries in Swift, but it gives you a easy way to do key value pair structures like you see there. And you can create arrays of dictionary elements, and that's a very common pattern in Swift. So this brings us to the Swift driver, and this is a screenshot of the announcement that we saw in June. Caitlin Mahar announced the first release of the MongoDB driver for Swift. Amazing release. It's an awesome piece of software, and that's what we're going to focus on today. I want you to know that there are two versions of the driver, and these are today represented by two separate code sets and two modules. There is a synchronous version and an asynchronous version. And I'm going to tell you that for a command line application, something that you're going to run from the command line, it's most likely going to be better served with the synchronous version. And I'll tell you why. Let's say I want to read a CSV file and loop through that file and add, for every row in that CSV file, I want to create a document in MongoDB. If I were doing this asynchronously, I could quite possibly I could end the program before I actually finished looping over all of the elements in my file. And it would create an unclean way that the program could terminate. And I actually experienced this. I started to write the example today using the asynchronous driver and ran into this issue. So I switched over to the synchronous version, and while from front to back, running the synchronous version will take longer because each task is going to be executed end to end. It is a much cleaner way to do that with a task that we're going to focus on today, which is like a command line or a CLI task. Now, if you're writing something for a web application, for example, maybe you're using Vapor, which is if you're a JavaScript programmer, and you're most likely familiar with Express, the Express framework.
Yep.
Maybe you create APIs. Well, there's a similar framework in Swift that offers a very similar capability. There's several, actually. Couture is one, and Vapor is another. Then you're going to want to use the asynchronous driver. But today we're going to focus on the synchronous implementation. We're also going to leverage Swift Package Manager. There are several ways to integrate packages, third-party packages, into your Swift development. One of them is CocoaPods. CocoaPods is a very popular way to integrate modules, third-party modules. If you're an iOS developer, you're most likely going to leverage CocoaPods to integrate modules. Not so much on the Swift server, on the server-side Swift end. Server-side Swift seems to be leaning toward the Swift Package Manager, or SPM, and that's what we're going to use today. What I'm showing you here on the screen is a Swift package description that is incorporating the MongoDB Swift driver. And there's a couple of key elements that we want to see here. This is the name of your package, very simply in this example, C, which is probably a dumb name for the package, but I'll get to a more meaningful one shortly.
I mean, can you do
Here I'm
emojis right there?
specifying. Yes, I think you can. It does support Unicode. So you want to specify the platforms that you're building your package for. In this case, we're going to build it for macOS. I could also have said comma and then iOS or watchOS or tvOS if I wanted to build packages for those other environments. But today we're going to focus on macOS. And then we specify our dependencies, and this is where we provide a package which gives us this is a set. We're going to specify the URL. And here is the GitHub URL for the MongoDB Swift driver. So interestingly enough, you can copy and paste that into your browser and go check out the source code of the driver. And then you want to specify the version that you want to pull in. We're currently at 1.0.1. I think there may have been a release of 1.0.2. But we want to make sure we're over 1.0.0 because there's a bug in 1.0.0 that we wanted to fix. And then we specify the targets. The targets are the output. What are we building? When we build something, when we specify a target, we specify what we're building. In this case, I'm going to build a program named C. I don't know why I chose this as an example. I'm sorry. It's a bad name. But again, that matches the package name. And I'm specifying the dependencies for this target because I can have dependencies for the package and I can have dependencies pulled in for each different target. I can have multiple targets that I'm building. So for example, if I was building a server-side program and an iOS app at the same time, I could specify multiple targets here. But we're not. We're keeping it simple today. I feel like I'm flying through this, Nick.
No, you're doing great, man.
Okay.
I'm dying to see some more code.
Yes, I know. Okay, I'm going to get to it. This is the code. All right, you got all that code?
Yeah, I've learned it perfectly now.
All right, I'm going to take a sip. Okay, you can see this is an example Swift program. And at the top, I'm importing some libraries. The foundation library is one of the most basic core libraries. It's not a third-party library. It gives you things like string manipulation methods and some of the things that we're going to do with looping over like contents and string. It comes from foundation. So any string manipulation that you're doing most likely comes from the foundation library. And then we're importing the MongoDB Swift sync. Now, as I mentioned before, we have Mongo Swift, which is the async, and Mongo Swift, which is the async, and Mongo Swift sync, which is the synchronous. I'm specifying that I want to use the sync. And I think what I'm going to do is continue on here. Here's a closer peek at it, but I'm going to show you. We're going to type this in. We're going to build this. So before we do that, I'm going to jump to MongoDB Atlas. And you're going to need to register for an account. That's super simple to do. You're going to need to log in. That's also super simple because now we have single sign-on. You can sign in with Google. But once you do sign in, you'll probably get something that looks like this, which is a wizard. It's going to walk you through the steps to create a MongoDB Atlas cluster. Now, for those of you that have been through this before, apologies, but it's super simple. It's like it almost does it for you. And I could really actually just go create cluster and I'd be done. But you want to make sure that you select the cloud provider of your choosing. I can put my MongoDB instances in either one of these. I think it's cool to click these and watch the data centers change. That's because Google Cloud has different data centers than AWS, for example. Okay, you want to make sure if you're just kicking the tires here, that you select a data center that has free tier available. Okay, so make sure you select that. I'm in Philadelphia, so I'm near North Virginia, so I'm going to select that as my data center. And then I'm going to select my cluster tier. Now, here's where it's going to be. You're going to see something different. You're going to have this sandbox available to you. It's not available to me because I've already deployed an M0 sized sandbox. You only get one of those per project. If you want more than one free tier instance, you got to create another project. And in this project that I'm in now, I've already created my M0 sandbox for the testing that I'm going to show you. So I don't get another one, but I could deploy a larger instance. And notice, keep an eye at this hourly rate here. As I change the size of the tier it's going to change the amount per hour that I'm going to be charged. Okay, now if I hit create cluster, that's when I'm going to have to specify my billing information. But if you just select M0 and there's no charge associated with it, you don't have to pull out your credit card. And that's free forever, ladies and gentlemen, free forever. Like, you don't have to ever pull your credit card out. And you can, let's say you have a very small requirement. It's less than 500 megabytes of storage, and you don't have a ton of traffic to your application. Maybe the free tier works for you. So then you're going to click create cluster, and I'm not going to do that. That'll take about 7 minutes to deploy, and then you'll get something that looks like this. Okay, this was my first cluster. It's a sandbox size, and you can take a look at the metrics. It'll show you what's going on that cluster. How we doing, Nick?
We're doing fantastic,
okay?
man.
Okay.
Checking to make sure I didn't fall asleep over here.
I did. I am. I'm testing you. So you can take a look at your clusters, your collections, once you're deployed. And again, I'm in Atlas. I've got access to all of my clusters. I have 3 clusters deployed. You may choose to deploy just one for this test. That's fine. But once this is the collection viewer. So I've clicked the collections, and here are all my collections in this one free instance. I would also highly recommend that you come back into your free. One of the first things you're going to want to do is maybe you want to get some data. So highly recommend clicking this load sample data set. That's going to give you some data that you can see in MongoDB. And then you're going to want to hit the connect button. And this is what we're going to use this connect button to get access to the MongoDB connection string. In our application, right, we're going to click connect your application. This is the connection string that I want to supply to the Swift driver. This string is going to enable my Swift driver to connect to MongoDB database in MongoDB Atlas. And you'll notice that it's fairly straightforward in its syntax. This is the MongoDB syntax of the URI. Then we want to specify a username and password and this is the host name. And
so we're using that even though that you have Node.js selected, right?
Correct. Yeah. So we don't have Swift in this list yet. Got to talk to the folks about that. And check this out. This is pretty cool. So once we do get that, you'll be able to click this button and get a Swift example. Yeah, this is a Node.js example. This is, if you're a Node.js programmer, this is what you're going to use to connect to that instance. And notice there are a couple of placeholders here, username and password. Keep that in mind for a moment. And then database name. Okay, so I'm going to copy this. I'm going to turn this off, and I'm going to copy that to my paste buffer. But before I leave Atlas, I want to make sure that I come over to my database access under security, click database access, and I want to create a new database user. Now, you can use if you're an AWS user, you can use your IAM credentials, you can use a certificate, or you can use password authentication. So you can create a user, I'll call it Twitch, and I'll create a password. You can auto-generate the password. And this is cool. Check this out, Nick. Did you know that you can create a yeah, me too. So a temporary user. So what this does is it for 6 hours, 1 day, or 1 week, if I turn it on, I'll be able to select 6 hours, 1 day, or 1 week. After that time frame, it's going to delete this user. That's pretty cool. So if you're doing a demo, or maybe you've got somebody that's on support and there's a problem and you want to give them access to your data, right? So perfect. So I created this 6 hours ago for 3 hours and 10 minutes, I guess. 3 hours and 10 minutes ago, I was doing some testing and I created a temporary user. No thanks. So this is my user. Now I'm not going to display my password because that is going to be a security issue.
You're not using one of those Kanye West passwords like 0000?
I always use that. How did you know?
Yeah, because I use it too, man.
I think everybody does. Either that or 1 2 3. 1 2 3 4.
There you go.
All right, cool. So I won't spend too much more time in Atlas. I hope if there are any questions, what is our pun count?
You're looking
if there
at
are any
chat.
more questions about this, yeah.
Oh man, I shouldn't say bad things about you then in chat.
No, don't do that. You'll hurt my feelings. All right, so that's really all we need to do. I spent, I don't know, less than 4 minutes in MongoDB Atlas deploying this instance. We should be good to go there. Now it's time to jump back to our presentation. And we didn't finish anything yet apart from deploying the instance. So now what I want to do is I want to create the app. Let's jump into Swift. Now I'm in an empty directory labeled August 28th, but I want to create a meaningful name for my Swift command line tool. Let's make a directory called CSV import Swift and cd into that. And here's where a Swift package manager comes in. And Swift is really cool. It's got commands, right? I can do Swift help, and there's a lot of things you can do at the top level, but I can also use subcommands, right? So Swift package is a subcommand. And I want to perform an operation on a Swift package. So I want to say Swift package, and let's just get some help there. So some subcommands under Swift package. Oh, this is a cool one. Generate Xcode project. So once you're in Xcode, that'll be handy for you. But this is what we're going to do now. We're going to Swift package init, and let's even get some help on that. Now, here is what we want. We want to create an executable. So I'm going to Swift package init -- type equals executable. And that's going to create my boilerplate project. It creates a package Swift file. Remember I showed that to you earlier? And it creates some source code for you as well as some tests. Now from here, I could actually just Swift build, and that's going to build my project for me. Let's make sure we have no bugs yet. We haven't introduced any bugs yet. And it links the CSV import Swift. So what does linking mean? Have you worked in a compiled environment before, Nick?
So linking, is this the same as aliasing, like in the command line, or?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, essentially. So it's actually what it's doing is it's actually creating a .build. When we link something, we're creating an executable, and it's using a configuration. Swift Package Manager uses several different configurations, and I think there are 2 available. There's debug and there's release. So by default, when you Swift build, it is creating a debug package for you. And if we cd into the .build environment, we see a debug directory. And then in there, we have a CSV Swift executable. So what happens if we run this? CSV import Swift. It just says hello world.
Sweet.
Awesome. So I've typed no code. I've done pretty much nothing to create this code. So let's see what that where that's coming from. I'm going to bet that it's coming from sources. And then there's a directory in here for CSV import. Okay, and this is main
flags that I've never even seen before. ALRT.
Yeah, later, man.
All right, you got to tell me what that is. I don't know what that is. So
that's LS. What is? I don't even know. It's burned into the firmware of my fingers at this point. I think it sorts it in last modified order.
I'm getting a chat saying that there's a pun incoming.
Yes. All right. So let's take a look at main.swift. This is a massive boilerplate program that does so much stuff. No, it doesn't. It just prints hello world, and that's it. So welcome to your first Swift program, ladies and gentlemen. You're done. You've created an executable, and if we wanted to run it, we could, from the top level, just say .build debug. Right? Oops, it's .build, Mike, not build. Debug CSV import Swift. So if you ever find yourself needing a specialized program which simply prints hello world, you're done. You're good to go. You can share that program with them, and away it goes. But I think we're going to want to do something else. We're going to want to expand on this. And the first thing that we want to do is introduce the modules or the external libraries that we're going to use as a part of our project today. And we can do that in VI or VS Code, whatever you're comfortable with. This is I showed an example of a Swift package before. How's my font size? You can see it okay?
Yeah, I asked that question in the chat, and it looks good. Every time I see
Okay.
this, it reminds me of Gradle for some reason for Android. I don't know why.
Actually, yeah. Yeah, it's similar. It's similar. So what we're doing is we've imported package description, and then we're going to provide some configuration to our package, right? We're going to give it a package. I think that maybe a class, yes. And we're going to specify the class members as name, dependencies. I'm going to introduce something called platforms. And this is going to give us what we need in terms of our, is it .mac? Let's see. Yeah, it's .macOS. Whoops. .macOS. And then we specify the version, which is v10_15. Is that a dot? No. So that is the version that we want to support today. We're going to build something that is supported on that version of macOS. And I could specify if I wanted to build something that would be supported on iOS as well. I could specify iOS.v11, but I'm not going to do that. I'm only going to build for macOS for the moment. And here's where we specify those dependencies. I'm going to uncomment this package reference, and I'm going to delete this comment. And here's where I'm going to specify github.com, MongoDB, Mongo Swift driver.git. Okay, and I want to go from version 101. Okay, that's going to give me the package. And then in my dependencies for that target, for that build, I want to specify a .package reference. And I want, not product, right? Product. And I want the name of the product to be Mongo Swift Sync. And that comes from the package Mongo-Swift-Driver. All right. And I think that should be it. And if I close this, once we modified our package, we then use the Swift build. And I want to show you the help on this Swift build. We can specify that we want to build source and test targets. I think by default it does that anyway. I can use debug or release. But if I just say Swift build, it's going to use a debug. And of course, I've introduced a fat finger error. Let's take a look at it. Manifest, Swift error, parse.
I give you credit for using the command line on all of this. I thought we were going to be using Xcode to do all of this coding, so I'm sure the Apple folks are like cringing at us going against the grain.
Yes, and it would probably be easier, right? It would probably give me
no idea.
Some assistance. I'm sure I've missed a comma somewhere.
No, I don't see a comma missing. Is it tab dependent in this file or no?
No. Mm-mm.
And that .v10 15, we sure that's what it was supposed to be?
Okay, so it says line 10. Platforms. Oh, dummy.
Okay.
Got a comma.
It fooled me too. I didn't see it.
I'm good at forgetting commas. Because that is a configuration object, and object elements are separated by commas. So
yeah.
So once we've built this, I'm gonna test it and make sure it's pulling in the driver. There are some dependencies, Quick Nimble and Swift NIO. Even though Swift NIO is a threading networking library that the async version uses. You'll get some warnings about SSL trusted routes, but don't worry about that. That's fine. It's just a warning. But back to the NIO. So there's a dependency in the async driver on NIO, but we're not using that for sync. How are we doing with questions? Anything in the
Nothing yet. People are waiting for puns, but other than that, I think we're good.
All right. So we can Swift run, and we really haven't changed the code at all. So we're still doing the exact same thing, but we do have our new libraries installed. So now we're going to leave the command line for a moment, and I want to take you into Xcode. So it's going to be a little bit easier to code in Xcode. I love the Xcode environment. But in order to leverage Xcode, you need an Xcode project. And in order to do that, we're going to use Swift package once again. And there's a nifty generate-xcode proj, which is a shortened version of project. And it generated an Xcode project for us. So if I open that,
Yeah.
there we go. Now we're in Xcode.
I wonder if there's any Visual Studio
so,
Code extensions for this. Do you know? Or Atom or whatever people use.
Oh, yes. Yeah, there are. For Swift, there are. So you can get syntax recognition in VS Code with Swift.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the folks that are working in Vapor do that.
Got it.
Okay. So Xcode is like VS Code on steroids. It's just a phenomenal environment. I love it. And I'm going to show you why I love it so much. At any point, I can find out where the source of, and maybe there's folks that have configured VS Code to do this. So maybe I should not be down on VS Code. I love VS Code as well. But like, check this out. Like, if I want to figure out where this package description came from, I just right click and I click.
It's like microscopic.
Oh yeah.
For the stream, I think.
Yeah.
Sweet. There you go.
So
that looks
I want to show you what I did there. So at any point, I can right click and show code actions. I can show quick help. This is just a final class, but let's say I wanted to figure out where this package description came from. It takes me right to, so this is coming from, this is part of the Swift package library. Let's go into, I'm going to show you that in a moment. It'll get a little bit more clear, and I'll show you why I really love it. So this is our package. It has run, and we're ready to go. Now we want to go into the main, and we want to begin writing our code. So the first thing we want to do is import our libraries. I know I'm going to be doing string manipulation, so I want to import Foundation. I know I want to import Mongo Swift Sync. How does it know? How does it know? Crazy. And then I want to create a URI variable, which will allow me to define my MongoDB connection string. Now you can say MongoDB localhost 27017 and your DB name. But remember back in the day, way back in the day, we, come on now. We went to here and we went to our clusters and we hit connect and we clicked connect to our application. And we copied this.
That's pretty way back in the day.
Okay. Right, way back in the day. So that's what this is where we want to put that in our URL directory.
Awesome.
Okay. So here we need to specify the name that I created, Twitch, and I could type my password, but that would be insecure. So what do we want to do? How do you do that in JavaScript?
I would prefer to do an environment variable with the process.env.
Yes. Guess what we have inside?
I thought you were going to say something like Swift doesn't support environment variables.
No, it does. It does. And I'm going to show you how to leverage them as soon as I copy it so I don't have to suffer with my bad typing.
Sure. Oof.
Process env.
Right. It's a little scary.
Right. So, yeah. So no worries. If you don't, if I try and type it, it might make it even more clear. But at any point, I can click jump to definition, and this will show me where that comes from. This, our lovely foundation library, the NS process info and process info class is delivering us the process info. In here, there's this lovely beast, which is another subclass, process info, and that's got a, where is environments in here?
There's no shorthand way to do that then, right? That was
Mm,
pretty
I guess you
long.
could.
I've never seen it before. Maybe
Yeah, you
that's easier than I think. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, so what happens is when you start typing it, like var murl, or I could say var pass equals process info, right? It's going to give me
All right.
hints. All right. So
Still got to remember
process
all of that though. I guess you get used to it.
dot process info dot environment, and you just hit tab, right? It's lovely.
All
And
right.
then this is the environment variable,
Sure.
right? So I've just embedded that in my string here.
Looks good.
And this is how I extract a string.
Like the
And
equivalent of a $sign curly
I'm
bracket, right?
unwrapping it. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So then I am going to create, I'm going to start using I'm going to configure my MongoDB client, just like you would do in JavaScript.
You
So
missed a
I'm
step.
going to let client. I did?
Yeah. So you left the DB name in there with angle brackets,
Okay.
which I assume will
Let's
cause
call
errors.
it. Yes, it would. Okay. Now I'm going to create a client variable, and that is going to be equal to Mongo client. And I want to pass in MURL. Now, this is weird. Yeah, I want to pass in MURL, and I think I can actually create a session. No, create the session later. Okay, so now that I've created a client, I want to try this as well. So we're going to do try, and if that fails, we'll get an error. Now I want to create a DB reference to the client DB object, and I want to access my students database. So now I have a database. I want to get a collection. So if you're familiar with the database is the same between relational world, right? We still call it a database, but instead of a table, we call it a collection. So now I want to get a collection, a handle on my collection. Actually, so let's create a session first. Let session equal client.start session, and I want causal consistency set to true, right? Session, start session, client session options, and that is causal consistency set to true. What is causal consistency, Nick?
Is that like a durability requirement or
Yeah.
yeah?
Yeah, exactly.
I've never heard of
So
it by that name before. That's why I'm a little confused because it goes by many other names.
Exactly. So that's just going to specify that I want my writes to complete. So causal consistency true. And now here's where we're going to define the structure, the schema for our data. We have a representation of our data that's going to live inside the code. And this is like down to brass tacks here. We've got data that lives in our database, and it lives on disk in BSON format. We talked about that earlier. I need a way to represent that BSON data in my code. And in JavaScript, it looks very similar to JSON, right? It's just JSON data that you fold up and stuff down the pipe, and it goes into your database. And the drivers handle encoding and decoding between BSON and JSON. Well, the same thing happens in Swift. And we're going to create a person struct. And this is going to conform to a protocol. And we're going to use the codable protocol. And this is Swift language. When I say conforms to a protocol, that just specifies that this struct behaves, it adopts the behavior of this specific class, codable. So codables let you have data that can be shuffled into and out of different formats. And this is we're doing this for MongoDB so that we can get it into and out of BSON. So what we're going to create is a structure that has a schema that has a first name, which is going to be of type string, a last name of type string. Let's create a date, where the date, to represent the date that the date was imported from the CSV file. That'll let us know when the data was imported. And what I'm doing is I'm setting a default value, and this is a handy method here called date that'll give me access to the current date and time. All right.
Yep.
And then I want to also pull in assigned. This is going to tell me, so what we're dealing with here is data from a student database, and it's telling me whether or not students are assigned to a specific class or not. So your data may vary. Oops, no comma. And lastly, I'm going to create an ID. What is an underscore ID?
The document ID, so the unique value.
ID. Right on.
And
that is going to be...
I assume that you can either use BSON object ID or string in Swift, or...
correct. You
correct,
can.
all right.
Yep. So next, now that we've got our schema defined, this is the type of data that we're going to store in MongoDB, and it's going to have something to do with the CSV file. So let's go get that CSV file. So I've got it stored on my computer under this path, mlin desktop example.csv. And it might be helpful if I just pop that open. Users, let's just do it this way, shorthand, desktop example. Okay, so here we've got the first name, the last name, and whether or not they're assigned. And all of these students are unassigned. So there's about, Michael Box registered a bunch of times. It is, I guess, maybe 25 or so elements. Keep that in mind. When we run our code, we're going to want to see how many times it iterates through. So I've created a reference, let path, silly, create a variable, a constant called path. That's not going to change. Oh, I should explain that there are vars and there are constants. You specify constants with let, just like, what is that, ES6 introduces let versus var. Now we want to create another constant with a reference to the person collection in our database. And this, we're going to use the DB object collection, and I'm going to specify the collection name in my database as people. I could call it students, I guess, but the name of the database is students. So, and I think that's it. Oh, and here's where we link the schema to the collection type. I say with type of person.self. And because I'm in a class, I'm using self to refer to this person here in the same class. Okay. So now I want to create a variable that will allow me to evaluate. This is going to be really sloppy. I'm going to do it super sloppy. So I want to be able to evaluate. Sometimes in CSV, get string representations of Boolean variables, like uppercase F, lowercase false. Or sometimes it's truly a false. It's a Boolean. But I want to be able to evaluate those, and I haven't figured out a cleaner way to do this. So maybe you can tell me how you would do this differently. But temp assigned is a Boolean variable. Notice the strong typing, right? I'm typing these variables, and then I want to create an integer, and I want to assign it to 0. So I'm going to count the number of rows in my CSV file as I import them. So now I want to use this nifty closure, this do. And this will give me some error checking. And I want to, inside my do catch loop, I want to let the content equal, again, this is error handling, try string comes to us from our foundation library. Oh, this is built in, Swift. Uh-oh, There we go. Oh, it's built in. Okay, so the string is a built-in. I thought it came from Foundation. But I'm going to take the string representation of the contents of the file at the path. Okay, and I'm going to use my encoding, setting it to .utf8. This is a .utf8 file. Okay, so here I'm saying get the contents of this file using string and passing the contents of file, passing our path in. Okay. All right. I think that's it.
Just as a time check, and we're in no hurry, but we're at the hour.
Oh, wow. That went quick. Okay, I'm going to type fast. I'm going to type super fast. You want to see?
No, don't type too fast. Oh,
boom.
you typed magically fast. What just happened?
I just copied and paste, but I'll walk through it. So here, now what I'm doing is I'm taking the contents.
Oh no, we've got we've got you old maid crashing our party over here. We know who that is, right?
Hey, Karen. Hey, Karen. Does she have a question?
Nope, she's just saying cut and paste.
I could type it in, and it's actually funner to type in Xcode. But let's take a look at some of these the definitions here. So again, our lovely Foundation library is giving us access to a bunch of these string methods. So whenever you're using any kind of manipulation on a string, you're probably using Foundation. I'm getting the contents from this path of the file at this path, and I'm taking the components of that. That also, yep, that's from Foundation string. Okay, and I'm getting the contents and the components separated by new lines. So this is how I'm building a variable. It'll essentially be an array of the rows in that file. Think of it like rows sub 0 will be first name, comma, last name, comma, assigned. Yep. Now I need to even further evaluate that, and I want to make sure that I'm skipping the header row. So I've created a Boolean variable called header, and now I'm going to loop through. This is a great demonstration of iterators in Swift. So for row, in rows, that array, right? So here's how you iterate over an array. For row, in rows, and I could print row sub row, right? If I wanted to. And then I can evaluate whether or not that row is null, so that maybe I have an end, maybe I have an extra new line at the end of the file. I want to catch that, so I'm going to skip that. And then I'm pulling out the values, and I'm creating an array of strings. Here's how you create an array of type string and initializing it to 0, to nothing. So it's an array of nothing. I'm just setting the strong value, this strong type value of values, this variable. And now I could mash this into one line, I guess I could. But here I'm saying this values array is equal to the row that we had, which is name, comma, blah, 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 to the components again, that awesome method, separated by commas instead of separated by new lines. So here we're looping through rows, we're grabbing the row, and we're evaluating each field separated by commas. Now I want to say, if I'm in the first one, just skip it. I don't care. Just skip that first row. Don't need it. Don't want to write that to my database, because otherwise I'd have name, first name, last name, which I wouldn't want. Otherwise, now we're going to evaluate it, and we're going to say if that the second value, let's go back to our, right here, maybe that's string. I don't know. I don't know if that's string or not, but notice the counting. We're at sub 0, sub 1, sub 2 in our array. So sub 2, if that's, and we're using a great built-in method called lowercase. So I'm taking the value and I'm lowercasing it so that I don't have to worry about uppercase F, lowercase a, whatever, and checking if it's equal to false. This catches the string case. Otherwise, I'm checking if it's also, maybe it's Boolean, and I'll check if it's an actual false. Then I create my temporary assigned variable to false. Otherwise, it's true. And now I'm ready to start working with MongoDB. All of that to do an insert one. Where's that insert one coming from? Anybody want to guess?
your other file with that you copy and paste from? I don't know.
No, it's defined in our driver.
Oh, got it.
Okay. Yeah. So the insert one method is from our driver. It's from the MongoDB Swift driver. And why are there two? Why do you think there are two, Nick?
Is
If
one
I
legacy, or is it just an overloaded function?
Nope, it is. There are two code sets. Remember, I talked about sync versus async.
Ah, yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yep. So here you can see that Mongo collection.insert1 is defined in the synchronous version. Sorry, in the synchronous up at the top, and the asynchronous version here. So if I wanted to use, it's the same method name. It's
Yeah.
just implemented in two different ways. So I guess essentially it is overridden.
That type
So
ahead
here
is
I'm
such a small, hardly noticeable distinction right there. Like I didn't see the little sync word in there at first.
yeah, and that doesn't scale with plus
Yeah.
when you increase your size. Okay, so here we are. We're getting ready to use our person collection. Remember, we defined that up here. We're using our driver to get a handle on the collection called people within our database called students. And I'm leveraging my struct here. So person collection dot insert one method. I'm going to insert one document. And so now I'm going to leverage the struct that I defined up here, my person struct. Okay. And I'm going to pass in the values from my CSV file. Well, I define my array of values. So first name is going to be the first value. If I switch back to my screen where I can show you, the first one should be Michael. And then the values sub1 should be the last name. The assigned should be whatever I evaluated here. And then lastly, I want to create a unique identifier. And the great thing about the driver is that it'll create it for me. The driver creates the unique ID. So that's not built into the database like Oracle, for example. Oracle would the database itself would have to create the ID. The driver is generating the ID here. Okay. And then we pass in the session that we created up top. Yeah. Did we? Did we create a session?
I don't think
I
so.
didn't. Oh yeah, we did.
Oh yeah.
I forgot it. Yeah, so I created a session. So you can do this in sessions, which will well, I won't go into what sessions are. Okay, so that is our error checked with a try. Insert one, and then assuming that all goes well, which I'm not even catching. I didn't put a catch in here, but since we're over the hour, I won't do any error checking. Some caveats here, folks. I'm not doing any error checking, and I'm not doing any authentication. So that will be things that you want to do. That'll be the 200 level class.
Well, I
All
mean,
right.
you're
So we
authenticating with the to the database up at the top with your username and password, but yeah, you could do better.
right, but yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to increment my counter, and I'm going to print the counter out. So this should print as we run this. It should print the row and inserted the number of and the actual row. So I'm not going to print it twice. So let's delete this, and I save that. I just hit Command S, and I should be able to hit run here, but I want to see all of the details. So keep in mind, I'm back in the command line in the same project. If I cat sources CSV import main, this is the code that we just typed in. Now I should be able to say Swift build, and if all goes well, it will build. We'll get some errors. That's okay. We got warnings.
Yeah.
Umbrella header for C. That's okay. These are all warning. And we linked our CSV import Swift. So now we can run it by running Swift run.
Is your
And
collection
we should
empty
see,
right now?
no, but let's do that. Let's go. I kind of spoiled the ending, so it's going to have more details in it. But let's go to.
Oh, all right.
Let's go back to our cluster, right? And we'll go into the cluster collections.
It's good so far. I'm learning a lot. This Swift, which
Oh
I
yeah,
have never touched whatsoever in my life.
isn't
It
it
looks,
amazing?
Yeah, it looks kind of like TypeScript mixed with Go. So
Yeah,
it's like a hybrid of the two for me right now.
yeah. And it's just logical. I don't know. I found it a really pleasant journey. So here's our students directory with our people.
Yeah.
And here's the inserts that we did. Now I ran this a number of times previously, so I probably should have deleted it before I
Sure.
ran it. But you get the
Yep.
idea.
Definitely.
Yep. So to close this all out, you can do a Swift build, and I think it's -C. Yeah, Swift build -C release. I think that's the way you do it. And that's going to create a releasable, shareable, executable that you can build into your CI,
Yeah.
CI/CD pipeline. And the Swift build command will be what you use to incorporate in your build process.
Sweet.
So that said, I want to jump back here. Just do a check on what we did. We built a cluster. We did use a Swift package. We built a hello. We added dependencies. Yep. We configured it. We read and wrote to MongoDB. Awesome. I think we accomplished our goal today. I hope that you guys found this useful, guys and gals.
Yeah, I did.
I want to leave you with a list of some really awesome resources. If you want to take this further, come and visit the MongoDB community forum. I hang out there. Like if you put a question in on Swift, I might not be able to answer it, but I might be able to shepherd it to somebody who can, or find somebody internally at MongoDB that can. Or even better, the folks that are actually writing the software, building the drivers, they're in that community as well from time to time. So community.mongodb.com. The Swift driver, go check out the documentations. Our documentation team is second to none. Just awesome. Great documentation there. I've been listening to Swift by Sundell. Great podcast. The guy is just all over Swift topics, and he gets some really interesting guests. I also was listening to Paul Hegarty, who is a professor at Stanford University. His course is CS 193, and it's 193P, and it's free. So you can take a Stanford University course, cs193p.p.stites.stanford.edu. Check that out. You can find more packages, more third-party packages like the MongoDB Swift driver at Swift Package Index. And I also wanted to drop a little plug for this amazing podcast I heard yesterday. It's got something to do with MongoDB. Do you know what the name of that is?
I'm not sure. I don't know if MongoDB has any good podcasts out there.
I don't know either. The MongoDB podcast is available on all podcast networks. You can find more information about that at mongodb.com/podcast. It's super easy to get to. I hope you guys enjoyed this. There you go in the chat.
Leafy podcast.
Leafy, yes.
Yeah. A question for you, Mike, before we drop. So earlier,
Yes,
when we first started this stream, you said you were going to do some kind of follow-up activity in the forums.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
I want to share the code that I wrote today. I want to make sure that you get a hold of this code and you can build on this. The challenge I want to throw out there is, if I were to actually like finish this as a project, I would want to create argument processing, argument handling, right? All CLIs should have good argument handling. Like when I was running Swift package build, package and build are arguments to the Swift command. So wouldn't it be a logical extension, a logical next step to build argument processing into what we just built? So I'm going to give you the source code in the communities. I'm going to be in the drivers section of the community. And that's where I'm going to post a link to the GitHub repository, where you can grab a hold of that. You can fork that repository if you want to. Maybe you want to submit a pull request with the way that you would manage arguments to this. And I hope this helped in your journey to learn how to become a Swift developer. And
Yeah.
I think that's it.
I think so too. Is there any other plugs that you want to give, Mike, while we're still on?
You can find me on Twitter at M as in Michael, L-Y, N as in Nancy, N as in Nancy, M Lynn. Hit me up on Twitter. Hit me up, and I love this. Just send people to the community. There's so much activity there. Community.mongodb.com.
Sweet. Then till next time, everyone. See you next week. I think actually I'll plug a stream that's happening next week real quick. So next week on Wednesday, Adrian and I will be doing a stream on game development. So if you want to tune in, should be exciting stuff. It's our first part of a series of streams.
Outstanding.
But till next time, everyone. See you later.